the name. It's in Canada. So you please, will you do a little bit of brief? The paper that you carried away with you carried your bio, and so you will have to speak a bit about your bio. So please unvideo yourself. We'd love to say hello to you and welcome you to our group. Ji Asif.
And start reading as well.
Okay. We cannot see you, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. Yeah, perfect. There you go. Lovely to have you with us, Asif. So your bio is with you. So if you could tell a bit about yourself, it would be remarkable. We have 133 participants from all over the world and many from Pakistan. Ji.
Thank you, Rusana. It's a difficult task to introduce one's own self with so many flaws and failings. But briefly, I teach at LAMS, where I've been teaching for a pretty long while, since I came back from Canada, from McGill. It's been almost 10 years I've been there, teaching classical Arabic and Islamic studies. I also teach Islamic poetry, in tracing the tradition from 16th century onwards in Punjabi and Persian and Hindi in the Indian subcontinental context. But in my previous life, I was also in the area of business administration, because in my days, if you couldn't become a doctor, you could only be a suitable boy for marriage if you did your MBA. So I had to do that part as well. So in commerce and finance, those are some of the subjects I also teach. And my area of research, for which I went to McGill in my master's and PhD programs, was basically hermeneutics, which is what we want to talk about. It's the art and science of interpretation of texts. You must have heard of the Greek god Hermes, who used to bring the language, the message of Olympian gods to mortals. He was a demigod, and make them intelligible to the mortals. So that's where the word comes from. So basically, I look into the hermeneutics of discourses related to Islam, basically, but also political ideas, Islamisms, traditionalisms, modernisms in Pakistan, and I use the plural deliberately because none of these traditions could perhaps be seen as monolithic wholes. So that's briefly about my work, and I'll just come directly to the topic itself. Ruxana has always been very kind. She's been inviting me for the last many years on similar topics. Excuse me. So let's begin by talking about this whole idea of engagement of texts. And might I also begin by... I don't know.
Do you want to keep the agenda on the screen? Because do you have a PowerPoint to share?
No, I'll just be... I thought there would be a blackboard, but your team has just given me some cards. I can show them if I need to.
Okay. Yeah. I think so. We are all ready for a very expressive expose, and I think PowerPoint would not be enough to sort of capture your nuances and what you have to say.
I used to have a colleague at McGill who now teaches at the Marine University in US. His name was Christopher Anzalone. Interesting that he did his Islamic Studies PhD from McGill. Came from a Sicilian mafia family, though. Wow. So he always used to tell me, he would say, Asif, I would love to be able to speak spontaneously as you do. And I would say, Chris, I would love to be as organized you are and have everything jotted down, but it doesn't work for me. So, now the idea of engagement with the text that we will be using in research is a very important one and quite often overlooked or not completely understood. in research work done in Pakistani universities, at least most that I've interacted with. It's an area we need to talk about. And might I also, refer to a favorite student of mine, a former student of mine, who's now the dean at LUMS. And Sana, I hope you won't mind me telling uh, people here that he's Ruxana Zia's son as well. And he was my student in his MBA program, and he did a senior project with me. And then, on the basis of the research that he did, he went to Harvard to do his PhD in education, and he's now our director at LUMS for sorry, the dean for student affairs at LUMS, and he's managing a lot of things. And I remember while he was at Harvard, he came back and taught a course because he was asked to do that by LUMS. And I still feel proud of the fact that he came back and he said that the most important skill that he had learned at LUMS was engagement with text. And he actually designed a course to teach students that particular aspect. So this is what we are going to talk about. I'll begin with this anecdotal joke about PhDs, and this goes something like this: that if you borrow from one book, that's plagiarism. If you steal from one book, that's plagiarism. But if you steal from many, that's a PhD. So sometimes it really works that way. And now with ChatGPT and other AI devices, a lot of things have been exposed. I mean, people who just thought that research is about collecting information, putting them together, and synthesizing them, and that's about it, are now really facing problems because that's not what research is really about. And obviously, excellent coffee. Ruxana wasn't wrong about it. I hope she's wrong about me. Um, uh, so the variation in different disciplines is there, certainly. I mean, scientific research would go on a different way. Legal research will have its own nuances. But each of these will be dealing with certain texts and with certain constructs. And those constructs and texts form the foundation of the way we think and the way we want people to think about our work, what we read, what we write. And this is where it goes beyond, just the collection of literature, compiling works for study of literature. It's more about not just knowing what to look at, but also knowing how to look at it. So one big part of research is knowing where to look for information. This is what Dr. Samuel Johnson said when he was compiling his famous lexicon, that knowledge is of two kinds. One is you know something, and the other is you know where to look for it. So the first part is obviously a topic for another discussion. How do you exactly, let's take one example and then we'll apply it to different disciplines. For instance, if you're researching in the area of social sciences and you want to study radicalism in Pakistan, radical militant uh, um, inclinations in Pakistan. The first question, and you want to do some kind of research there. Supposing you want to understand, let's say, I'm just giving one random example. Let's say somebody wants to do a research paper or research work on the Lal Masjid debacle that Pakistan, faced, and was a huge issue, and so much work has already been done on it. The first question obviously will be, after so much work, what is it that I am contributing? What is my intervention in the discourse? Um, Supposing you want to talk about, let's say, the psychological, um, or let's say even the religious ideas something that people have not really worked on. People have talked about, um, the social aspects, the political aspects, even the psychological aspects. But very few people really understand the religious ideas that fed the militancy or the argumentum ad baculum, the argument by stick. That the girls took out sticks. For those who don't know about this incident, this happened during President Musharraf's tenure as the president, and there were some young girls uh, studying in a seminary, and they were not very happy with some Chinese messieurs running some massage parlors in Islamabad, and somehow they just suddenly decided they took out sticks, kidnapped those messieurs, and took them to the children's library, and it was a kind of a case of kidnapping, and obviously Chinese government wasn't very happy about it. So the pressure was there, and after a certain while, they had a tiff with the with the government, which resulted in a violent action from the side of the government. And a lot of people lost their lives, but the issue was kind of curbed. It created a host of questions about why this happened, what were the issues, why wasn't the government able to control, what would be the right, what would have been the right way of dealing with these people. Few people, I did a couple of television programs on it with particularly the one I remember was with the Dawn Television and with Geo, and very few people talked about the religious ideas that fed this kind of inclination. Well, even while the negotiations were going on, there were journalists. So I remember one year, one year after this debacle, the wife of the cleric who was then arrested, wife of the khatib who was arrested, was then running a kind of a quasi movement while he was incarcerated. And after about a year, we did a TV program, and I was invited by Ijaz Haider, the editor of Friday Times, to have a talk. And I remember there were two other journalists, and behind the scenes they were talking. I don't remember the name, so I can do a little bit of backbiting here. And they were going on. They were ranting about their inability to engage with this woman, and they were saying, I don't know how many of you know Urdu, but I'll translate. So he said, "यार अब हम क्या करें? वो उसको बुला लेते हो तुम उसको हदीस वगैरह कोट करती है हमें कख समझ नहीं आती." They were senior journalists. So basically, they were saying that we don't understand where she comes from because she keeps quoting the Quran and the Hadith, and this is not our area, this is not our fort. And this is engagement. You're talking about ideas that affected everybody, and you invited senior journalists. So I was the only person who was trained in that area. And as soon as the engagement began, we began discussing some of the classical texts, some of the Quranic texts, later interpretations going up to Shah Waliullah, and in a short while she was saying, brother, like we didn't teach us this stuff at the madrasa. This is what I'm talking about, the engagement with text. And then we talked about that famous hadith, which has become such a big problem everywhere in the world where militancy is a problem. It goes like man ra minkum munkaran falyughayyiru biyadi, that those of you who see some evil should stop it with their hand, or stop it with their hand, by force. فَإِلَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِي فَبِلِسَانِي, and if they aren't able to do that, then with the tongue. فَإِلَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِي, and if not that, then in their heart. And وَذَلِكَ أَضَعْفُ الْإِيمَانِ, this is the lowest level of faith. Now, this is where engagement with the text comes in. Recently, Michael Cook, I think he was at Princeton at that time, wrote a complete book on it, about 500 pages. Then there's a shorter version as well. We're discussing this hadith only. And he gathered all the information in Muslim discourses explaining how the interpretation has to be seen in terms of the philological aspects of the text, in terms of the sociological aspects of the text, political aspects of the text, cultural aspects of the text, and he's discussed all that not ethically, not from the outside world as from the lens of a person sitting extraneously and looking at a social phenomenon, but amically from inside the discourses, pointing out some of the best interpreters. So this is what I mean by engagement with text. That when you have a list and you've developed your bibliography, maybe through the help of a professor, and this is or something I always talk about, that please, just don't rely on Sheikh Google or Wikipedia. These are good sources, but you have to verify them with a person who is an expert. In Kari Hakimi Nis Damane Kalimi Gir. This requires the wisdom and the sagacity and the experience of a trained eye. So you need the right person to guide you in such endeavors. So once you have, through the help of the right person or the right persons, done your bibliography, the next question obviously would be how to engage with those texts, and why are they important. Let's take another example of a recent research work that came my way. I was asked to review a PhD thesis recently, and this gentleman had talked about, I've forgotten the name already. He had talked about jihad as a social, and religious phenomenon, and the ideas of militancy and terrorism and so on. And he had begun from the 6th, 7th, 8th century onwards, going up to modern times, up to the times of Sir Sayyid Khan, and going beyond that to the times of Abul Ala Maududi and others, explaining how he felt that the Muslim Weltanschauungs, the Muslim worldviews, basically were based on the idea of the conquest of the world for the purposes of Islam, spreading Islam. Now he's developed that thesis, and I want to critique it, and that's my research, let's say, and I want to do a paper on it. How do I do it? So there are different ways. One is that I just look at it, gather certain books in the area of Islamic studies, for instance. There are indices. There are databases which are there in almost all the disciplines that I know of: religious studies, social sciences, humanities, languages, you name it, mathematics. You will have those encyclopedias, you will have databases which will tell you what is published on an article that you're reviewing. For instance, in Islamic studies, we have what is known as Index Islamicus, and you just type and you'll get all the information about people who have reviewed those articles or books already. And then you just sit down, you feed the data into ChatGPT, and you have your reviews, and then you can combine them, do a little bit of shuffling, and there you have a good pizza of PhD, or a paper or whatever. But the other approach is you do all that. I don't mind. The exams that I give in LUMS to my students, particularly the MBA students, are all open book, open notes, chat GPT allowed, internet allowed. They can call home their colleagues over the telephone, get ideas from them, and then do their paper. The exams that I like to give are that way. But what I want to know is whatever materials they have gathered, are they able to engage with it? What do we mean by that? Now, for instance, this text that I talked about, the book is a very interesting one. It's not written very long time ago. It's pretty recent, by Michael Cook. Now, what he's done is that he takes out this hadith, this simple piece of text, and the first thing he does is that he looks at all the past, interpretations, philological, sociological, and sees how different scholars have interpreted those texts. And then he goes on to his own philological analysis and tries to see what intervention can he make. For instance, I'll give you one example. He looks at the text, and apparently the text would say that a Muslim is obliged to stop evil, to put an end to evil, or to curb evil wherever he sees it, something wrong that is happening. The exact word used is nahi anil munkar. Stopping what is munkar. Munkar refers to those wrong conventions in society which people are not happy with. Eve teasing, for instance, would be munkar. Now, one idea is that you just take this and begin applying it. But then the other idea is you go deeply into it, look at the word, and realize what does it mean. I mean, munkar, for instance, does it apply to crimes as rape, as zina, as fornication, as theft? What were the rules which emerged from within the text and from within the intertextuality of the text? Intertextuality of the text. That's another important concept that I'd like to emphasize a lot, because no text can be interpreted in isolation. Every text is based on ideas and terminology which are intertextual. You don't understand a text if you are not aware of the background in that particular tradition, as Talal Asad has also pointed out. So he looks at the intertextuality and comes up with this explanation that when munkar would refer to crimes as of this kind, there are other verses in the Quran interpreted through exegetes. There are other narrations of hadith interpreted through the sharihin, or these experts, traditionalists, as they're called, which point out that these are crimes for which legal authority is required. And based on this interpretation, he's able to gather enough data to show, philologically and otherwise, that this text basically does not mean that you take the law into your own hands. If your neighbor's dress code, for instance, is not according to your understanding of religion, this hadith does not mean that climb your fence and go over to the neighbor's side and implement your idea of right and wrong by taking the law into your own hands. It's within the ambit. If you're a judge, within the ambit of your authority. If you're the director of teacher training program, then within the ambit of your authority, not outside your authority. So Ruxana is not going to obviously force me to wear different clothes if I don't want to wear them. So within the ambit of your authority, and this interpretation requires engagement with text. It also requires an understanding of intertextuality. Let me explain that, because contrary to this approach of reading and engaging with the text is another approach. Recently, there was a young girl who insisted that she wanted to, get some guidance, and that she was also, uh, uh, the former teacher of one of my sons. So I had to give her time. She came with a thesis, very interesting thesis, and she wanted to research on it. So I gave her a little bit of guidance, and she came up with a typical Pakistani way of writing her thesis. The topic she wanted to write on was the idea of permission in Islamic traditions to a girl to choose her own life partner. In the wake of the Pakistani context, there's a lot of people who believe that this is not possible. There was this idea of wali's consent in marriage, which was even legalized by a former judge of the High Court by the name of Justice Hafiz Chima. And I remember I wrote a very, very strong criticism on it. And he used to be a good friend. Then we were friends no more after I wrote my article. And based on those notions, this has been a problem. It was late. This judgment by this High Court judge was later on, contradicted by another judge, Justice Ranja, and finally Supreme Court had gave its decision in favor of the Hanafi principle, which allowed girls to choose their own husbands. But this is not, the notion is still very much there. So she wanted to write about it. And what does she do? When I looked at the paper, she was just picking up Quranic verses, Hadith verses, interpreting them, giving her ideas without any kind of understanding of intertextuality. She was an MPhil preparing for her PhD. By MPhil, you should have this understanding. She was preparing for a PhD. So Islam says this, Islam says that, and she would begin with ideas like Muslims generally believe. Where did you get this from? Which text did it come from? How can you make such a bold statement? Muslims believe this, Muslims do this. This is the Quran says, oh, you are going to explain it, and nobody else did. Why have you jumped the gun? Why have you not engaged with the tradition? How have you shown philologically that other interpretations by some of the biggest names in history in that tradition were right or wrong, and your Eureka has the textual strength to be accepted as a notion, right? So this is something which you have to explain to those people, and the idea of intertextuality becomes a very important one. People will just quote verses from Iqbal, from Ghalib, studying in literature. Literature is another area which as I said, I teach in the literature department at LUMS as well. They'll just pick up a verse without even realizing what the intertextuality. I mean, the first couple of Ghalib in his collection, Naqsh faryadi hai kiski shokhi hai tahrir ka, kaghazi hai perahan har paikar tasveer. Now, how do you? I mean, I've seen so many professors who do not understand this verse. Why? Because they're not aware of the intertextuality. Would anybody like to give us an explanation here?
Asif, we have lots of, I'm sure there are some, but we have lots of international
Okay, let's move on to Shakespeare.
Go to a discipline.
Let's move on to Shakespeare. So
Yeah.
when Romeo looks at Juliet in the famous balcony scene, right? And it says, "The soft light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who's already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off." Now, there's an intertextuality about it. Would anybody like to explain why who's sick and pale with grief, and what's the reference to vestal livery?
I fail over there because I have totally no love for Shakespeare. But I wonder if there's somebody in there who, enjoys Shakespeare and perhaps could state something. We are happy.
You're not going to bring me down to the level of Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, I know.
Bill
That's
Gates.
where I belong, I guess. Okay. So I don't see any.
So let's just look at this passage now. She's in the balcony, and she's standing in a certain direction. Look at the illusions. Look at the illusions, how beautiful they are, and they're so intertextual. And she's coming from the other side, and there's moon on the other side, pale moon. And she says, Juliet is the sun. So arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. Diane, you have to know this already. You have to have that study. You can't just go through the passage, casually. You have to know that Diane is the goddess of the moon and the goddess of the Vestal Virgins. You have to know about the Vestal Virgins. I mean, they had a very, very special. They were considered to be a symbol of piety and of blessings, and they used to wear certain robes, which was called the Vestal livery. And there's a whole tradition about it. I mean, if you even open up Wikipedia, you'll know who Vestal Virgins were, and there was a certain sanctity about them as well. certain aspects of purity as well. And Diane is the goddess of moon, and she's the goddess of. And now look at the verse. Now look at the words. She's standing in the balcony in the opposite direction. She says, "Arise, fair sun, but soft what light through yonder window breaks." There's a little bit of light coming, and he sees the visage of his beloved. "A soft what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who's already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she's envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off." So he wants a romantic engagement, not a textual one. If you don't understand that intertextuality, you will not understand. You begin to read the Bible, for instance. If you don't understand, you've heard of the old law, that thou shalt not commit adultery, but verily I say unto you that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, there's a background. If you don't understand the Torah, if you don't understand, if you've not read your books in Deuteronomy, there's so many references in the New Testament that you will not be able to understand.
Yeah.
Unless you have that background.
So
So
there was a question, Asif. While you are talking, and I understand the depth of research and engagement as a researcher you have to do with what the text actually means and how you have to explore it way down. But even when you explore the world's best, writers on that topic, is that not but their opinion? Do you not also, when you are countering something, come up with something solid to say that this was interpreted such and so and so, but in my with this background it could also mean this? And I
yes,
think
yes,
that's
exactly.
where you engage as a researcher.
That's your intervention, but you don't jump the gun. You don't ignore the tradition. I mean, you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't stand in isolation. You have to go through that process and then move on to that aspect. And I'll just be coming to the next point that I want to talk about was that once you are aware of this tradition, then comes in the approaches to hermeneutics, the art and science of interpretation of text. And we don't understand its importance, its significance, even today, because right now uh, the university that is investing more than any other university perhaps on hermeneutics is a technology based university, is a science based university, which is MIT. Because in now the fashionable area of AI and HCI, what researchers have realized is that what they're trying to emulate, and I recently wrote an article for King Fahd University on it, on the idea of Ibham, can that be emulated by AI? AI is still not able to compose a ghazal. It can't compose certain kinds of poetry, but there's a lot it's doing. So researchers in MIT are trying their best to understand the hermeneutical approaches, ranging from Schleiermacher, the romanticists, to Gadamer, to Betty, to Paul Rico, and to other postmodernists as Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault and what have you. Now, these approaches are very important vis-a-vis the question that Ruxana has come up with. Once you are aware of these intertextual aspects of the text in any area, be it science, even in science, this is important because science also begins with constructs. As Will Durant said, science begins as philosophy and ends up as an art. The fact that you have an idea that certain kinds of elements as metal, for instance, as iron can be molded, is an idea. Then you discover it. That's technology. Then you shape it. That's advanced technology. You shape it very well. That's art. but then how should I use it, to make a knife to cut my butter or to kill a person? That's again philosophy. So it goes back to philosophy, and in science you have to deal with these constructs. Now, Stephen Hawking, for instance, one of the famous or one of the things that he became very famous for in interaction between science and theology was his notion of uh, the the nothingness in the atomic particles. Now, it rings a bell because you immediately think of Louis Pasteur's times when he discovered pasteurization. In those times, there was this idea that became very popular in science at École Normale in Sorbonne, which was the most prestigious institution of science in those days. And the scientists had already had almost agreed. There was a consensus, which is, in theory of science, in philosophy of science, how does something become a fact depends largely on consensus of the experts. So the experts had already agreed that spontaneous generation was possible. Life could emerge out of nothingness. That was their idea, and they would prove it by, containing, having containers, glass containers, showing that life would emerge. And then in came Pasteur, who had actually begun his research to make a better beer for France in competition with Germany, but he discovered pasteurization. He was also a devout Christian. So he came in and he pasteurized those containers and said, now bring life out of it. And the whole idea of spontaneous generation went away. So Stephen Hawking comes up with this idea of nothingness, which is the basic element. And everybody was like, my God, like this is new science. But what is his nothingness? It's an interpretation. It's a construct. His nothingness His nothingness has an energy field and it has properties. I could have named it X or Y or Z. What's in a name? It's not a hand or not a foot, not any of the part belong to man. Romeo would smell as sweet were he not Romeo called. So I could have named it anything, but he named it nothing, nothingness. So, when he's deconstructing theological ideas, for instance, Stephen Hawking's, he will come up with his own constructs, even in his layperson or in his regular jibes. The most famous one that I remember was where he said that I know of many people who believe in predestination, look both ways before they cross the street. To which I countered by saying that I know many people who look both ways in the street and still meet an accident.
Asif,
Even in
small
the area of
question.
science.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
You were talking about how even the theoretical constructs about anything have evolved over the ages, right? And how do you know that this is a classical text and it's true for all times? Like we all know, truth is the best honesty and truth is the best policy. Yes, those are some classic standard comments that will never change. But then a lot with time will go on with new addition to our knowledge, keep going undergoing a lot of textual understanding might change. So
Absolutely,
how do
absolutely, Ruxana.
you date things? And
That's
that
the
is the beauty, that you have to date the stuff so that you know that it's so and so time, this was the currency at that time, or
Well,
right?
I would even deconstruct this idea that you've given.
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, although the motto at Harvard, for instance, where your son went, is veritas, truth. But the word veritas in Latin
Yeah.
also refers to something else. It
Yeah,
also
but
refers to verification. So in
exactly.
research, there is no absolute truth. When you begin your research, you always begin with the idea that all of these classical constructs, early constructs, there's no boundary. Anything can be critiqued and anything can be deconstructed. That's the whole idea. So verification or falsification, and to use Karl Popper's terminology, is the whole idea. You verify or you falsify something through research, and that happens through this process of hermeneutics to which I'll be coming. And a little bit of background on that, and then I'll end my session there, and we can talk in terms of the question and answer session if needed. Now, you have gone through all the relevant materials, all the relevant literature. You've developed an understanding of the intertextuality. You understand the allusions and the implied aspects as well. And after that, you enter into this process of your own interpretive intervention. What are the approaches? Now, this is an area which became popular in the Western world through biblical studies. In the Muslim world, it was there for a very long time. Obviously through Quranic exegesis and through other forms of interpretation. But in the Christian world, one of the most important people that we can think of is Martin Luther. Because as we know, that he was not very happy with the consensus of the bishops, and as a trained theologian, understanding logic and understanding all other aspects of discourses in his time, he could see that some of the consensuses that the bishops would develop would be logically contradictory. And he had this problem, we all know that history, that how can God's mind have logical contradiction? Human mind would have that. So he found it safer, in his own words, to resort to his own conscience and to go back to the fundamentals of the text itself and study of the text. The logocentrism that Jacques Derrida refers to has a lot to do with those reform movements as the one begun by Martin Luther, and then you have the Anglican Church and others following suit. The text became important. Presbyterians, I think there's a lot of Presbyterians here. The emphasis is on going back to the text and looking for the meaning itself through a process of what is known as hermeneutics of recovery. We don't accept as Roxana said, the past interpretations. I'm going to go back into the text myself, look into them, develop the skills. That's important. Develop the skills that are required to engage with the text and then do the interpretation. But then, of course, there can be many, many different approaches. Many, many different approaches. You look at one thing, you look at one person. In modern hermeneutics, even a piece of art that has been interpreted is a text. You, as a subject, are the interpreter, and it's the object that you are interpreting. Anything can be interpreted. And that's the most powerful tool we have. Good Muslims, bad Muslims, friendlies, unfriendlies, good guys, bad guys. These are all constructs that are formed. Somebody looks at Taj Mahal and says, wow, it's a symbol of love, a move. And in comes Sahil Ludhianvi, the famous poet, who looks at it at the Taj Mahal and says 22,000 laborers worked on it under the instruction of a dictatorial king, whose eighth wife lost her life bearing the 14th child, and he is the greatest lover of all time. Sorry, I'm not willing to accept that. And he comes with the famous. Can we share something here on the screen? Because we have an international audience, I would have recited some part of Sahil Ludhianvi's verse, but nobody will understand. So.
But what you want to say is that he was not as romantic about the notion of Taj Mahal.
No, I just want to explain what he has done. Just take a minute.
Asif, we also have.
I'll just take a minute and end the session with this.
Yeah, because we have another session at 1 from Istanbul.
I just need about 2-3 minutes. I don't know how much time I have.
I think there is a question that we can take in the meantime. Okay. And it's, I think, of somehow a missed point that you made. Sir, how does, are you ready for the question?
Yeah.
Sir, how does engaging with the text look like? How to know if I'm engaging with the text the way I should? Now, that is a bar that he is asking, where do I place my own bar for the intensive work that I do, an extensive and intensive? Would that be explainable?
Yeah, this is exactly where I would talk about some of these. ये कर दें जी, फिर नहीं होना तो. Um, uh, this is exactly where I would come to those approaches, and I would use this example. You know, Sire comes in. If I could take out, I mean, those of you can open it up yourself, can do that. You just type Taj Mahal and type Asif Iftikhar. You'll see my translation of that point.
Okay.
So here comes Sire, and in a very powerful way in Urdu poetry, he says, "I'm sorry, I'm not willing to accept this. These orchards and these walls and these of this palace. Through them, a dictatorial king has shown to a poor man's love disparaging malice." So you know, he talks about how the love of a simple laborer could be as sublime as yeah, this is the poem. So I don't know who has shared it. It goes like, "The Taj for you beloved depicted with its beauty you afflicted. Let our tryst be elsewhere, love. For what cause the poor may roam in gathering places of the rich? Paths with symbols of the glory have no room, love, for our story. My love, undercover celebrate love. These signs of grandeur. Saw you not? Happy round the tombs of kings, our dingy homes you forgot. Are countless those who did love, says who their feelings were not true. But praise none to their amour, for they too never riches knew. These palaces, tombs, towers, and walls, pillars of dictatorial kings' lofty glory, flowery patterns on time's bosom, in blood of our forebears, still gory. My love, they did too love well, the Taj's beauty, whose toil shaped the laborers. Graves of their loved ones unmarked, none on them can replace. The engraved walls and doors, the arches, this orchard, the Jamuna bank, this palace, an emperor through his wealth has shown to a poor man's love, disparaging malice. Let our trust be elsewhere, love. So, you know, like it's a powerful rhetoric, and he just looks at it and interprets it in a different way and becomes a powerful way of interpretation. What are the theories? From Schleiermacher and his colleagues and supporters who believed that the text was sufficient unto itself, to Gadamer, who talked about the context and the historical context that is required to recover intentionality of the text, to others in postmodernism who thought that the intentionality of the author cannot even be recovered. It's an elusive concept, and the reader has to reinterpret. Um, um, let's take the example of deconstruction, idea of deconstruction by Jacques Derrida, where if I say to my subordinate, if I send him a written text, because he's talking about written text, not about verbal communication, where the hermeneutical cycle can correct itself and reach closer to authorial intentionality. But if I send him a text message that I have guests coming from abroad, my old Hsonian friends, please show them a good time. And he brings a 2,000 pound bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild vintage 1979, and they turn out to be Tablighi, a group. It's not good time for them. So that difference of the change in signification and the diachronic aspect of hermeneutics is going to change things. From those ideas of classical romantics to postmodernist hermeneutics and to postmodern hermeneutics, so much has happened that researchers need to understand before they even write a simple statement that this is what I have understood from such and such text. Without that engagement, your research will always be seen as very, very flawed by the international academia.
May I interject here? You made a very, very relevant point, Asif, and there is a very question that answers what you just said. Dr. Shaila Ahmed, I don't know from where, I wish people would write their university. Can we say that we have to read between the lines? And I think you lost the lecture. It is not about reading between the lines. Is it first having what theoretical construct are you going to start with to understand the text that you're doing? Is it coming from, I don't know what a postmodernism it is it coming from classicism? What approach are you going to take to interpret the text? And I think that's what becomes the key. Asif, how would you place that?
It's not just your own. I mean, first, as I said, you have to have a fair idea of what has happened earlier. Without that, you can't just recreate things and speak in vacuum. because
Yeah.
there's a discursiveness of tradition, as Talalos put it. Johnny come lately cannot just come into a tradition and tell a whole, series of threads in the tradition and all the people involved, that this is what I think is the right way of interpreting the text. You have to have a fair idea of that. Only then you will gain the credibility where your word is taken seriously. I mean, if I get up and begin giving advice to a medical doctor on how to treat psychotic disorders, as a layperson, I don't have that credibility. I need to know something. I need to have certain credentials. So that applies to almost every field of a serious academic research. But the second thing is, once you've gone through that interpretation, I mean, take the example of psychotic disorders, the work done by Michel Foucault, for instance, how we define madness. It's an interpretation. And Foucault's work on it, Michel Foucault's work on it, is a very good example where he talks about homosexuality, first of all, demonized as a sin, then demonized as a disease, then accepted and finally eulogized. There's this joke about it, about a person who was quite religious in his tradition, in his personal choices. And he said, "I'm leaving the country. It's becoming too westernized." He said, "Why?" So he said, first of all, they said that the homosexuals were sinful. Then they said they were mad. Then they accepted them generally, and now they're eulogizing it. So he said, "What's your problem?" He said, "I want to move to another country before they make it mandatory." So the development has occurred, and you need to be able to do that before you come up with your own intervention.
Absolutely. And I think that was very perfectly responded. Uh, um, there is a lot of, oh my God, we have such a long, Sumera Akram, MPhil scholar. Our next expert is waiting, but we'll take this question. I do not know if you can see it on your screen. Critical discourse analysis. For the literature review of my thesis, I extracted critical contingencies in comparison to the American discourse on the war on terror. And I explored the discourses on terrorism in Pakistan post 9/11 by engaging with the textual constructions of reality in social, political, and religious affairs. Can we do the critical discourse analysis for collecting the textual constructions, how West-centric research constructs Pakistan reality in security studies, of course, and then applying deconstructivism, post-structural theory I can interpret and counter-produce through Pakistan's historical civilization space in them. I mean, it is a valid way, definitely, I see, but Asif, what
Very,
would
very
you?
good question.
Very well.
I am not. I have little time, so I won't go into the details. But I completely agree with you. I mean, this is what we need to do.
To
I
do,
mean,
yeah,
as you would already know, Edward says Orientalism laments about the idea of looking at everything from
from the
the.
Western
But
time.
yeah, but at the same time, we have gained a lot, as critics of Said also pointed out. We've gained a lot through the accumulation of whatever has been acquired in terms of knowledge and construction. And at the same time, the trick, in my very humble opinion, it's a very good question. I would spend hours talking about it. The trick is not to be overwhelmed by emotion and summarily just throw away the baby with the bathwater, that this is coming from the West, so it's biased. No,
No.
I mean, we have to be rigorous there as well. And one of the ways, inter alia, is to be very well grounded in your own traditions. Daste har nahal bimorat kunad sui modar akith morat kunad, as Rumi said, that in every hand incompetent, in every hand inept shalt thou be indisposed, unto thine origin return, that the soul be reposed. So be very well aware of your own strengths and your own tradition. You don't have to abandon the Western approaches and methods. When you're well aware, you'll be able to blend them together and come up with more rigorous analysis with your training.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. You could go on for hours and hours, Asif. You have so much knowledge across the world. We're ending the poll now. We have a lot of satisfied, 76% satisfaction. And we are very happy that most of you have walked away, 79%, with learning something new. And I know I learn new things every time. Our you the decolonization of the text is what a lot of the buzzword going around, but are we able to do counter research of the quality that has been done before? And I think that's where our challenge would lie, in doing that quality of research that is very difficult to refute within the construct that you develop. Okay, dears, thank you so much. Asif, I'm not going to tell you to talk again because we'll take up another hour talking about it. And I apologize, I won't be able to say goodbye to you. We're going to close our session here.